Some people exist in the background of power. They're the gears in the great machine, unseen, unheard, and almost always underestimated. They schedule the meetings where fates are decided, they type the memos that seal deals, and they pour the coffee for the men who think they rule the world. This is the story of one of those people, a woman they saw as nothing more than a secretary, a piece of the office furniture. They never imagined she was the only one who could see the rot festering in the heart of the agency, and that she alone had the guts and the cunning to bring it all crashing down. You're a secretary, Anya, not an analyst. Stick to your calendar. The words, dripping with condescension, came from my boss, Director Vance, his voice echoing in the sterile, top-floor conference room. His associate, Mr. Sterile. Sterling just smirked. To them, I was just the person who organised their mess. They had no idea I'd just found the digital breadcrumb that would unravel their entire treasonous enterprise. They had no clue that the scheduling conflict I just flagged was a deliberate move in a chess game they didn't even know they were playing. And as they dismissed me with a wave, they had no idea I was the only person on Earth who could destroy them. My name is Anya Sharma, and for 9 years I was the executive secretary to the two most powerful men at the Bureau of Strategic Intelligence. To them, and to everyone else in that towering glass monolith we called an office, I was just Anya, the one who knew every extension, how Director Vance liked his coffee black, 2 sugars, always in the ceramic mug, never paper, and who could get a last-minute flight to Geneva when the world was ending. My kingdom was a small desk in an alcove right outside their mahogany-doored offices. From this little throne, I was the gatekeeper, the scheduler, the human firewall. I was privy to everything, yet they saw me as knowing nothing. My life was a perfectly orchestrated symphony of other people's priorities. 8 a.m. Sync schedules. 8:30 a.m. Prep briefing binders. 9 a.m. Field calls from twitchy department heads. The days unfolded in a blur of clacking keys, hushed phone calls, and the faint scent of old paper and industrial strength cleaner. They saw me as a function, not a person. A pair of hands to type, a voice to answer the phone. They never noticed I could recall the exact date of a meeting from 3 years ago, or the specific wording of a memo they thought was long deleted. I have what doctors might call an eidetic memory. I just called it being good at my job. I saw the patterns they missed, the subtle power shifts, marked by who was suddenly having lunch together. The tremor in a junior analyst's voice when he delivered a report he knew was about to be ignored. I was the ghost in their machine, the silent observer who saw every tell, every lie, every carefully buried secret. Sterling, with his tailored suits and predatory smile, would toss files on my desk without a glance, muttering, "Have this transcribed by noon." Vance, older and cocooned by his authority, would just talk at me, rattling off complex travel plans like he was dictating to a machine. To them, my mind was a filing cabinet. They never asked for my opinion. They never considered that the person handling their most sensitive documents might actually be reading them and understanding them. That was their first and most critical mistake. It all started on a Tuesday night. A storm was hammering the city, and the office was empty, except for the hum of the servers and the skeletal cleaning crew. Vance and Sterling had called a last-minute, off-the-books meeting. I was told to stay late, not to take minutes, but just to be available. In other words, sit at my desk and listen to the muffled, urgent tones of their conversation through a very thick oak door. An hour later, they came out, faces grim. Sterling, a man who was never flustered, actually looked shaken. He handed me a single, encrypted audio file on a thumb drive. Transcribe this. Top-level clearance. It gets deleted the moment you're done. 1 physical copy for the shredder. No digital trail. This wasn't totally out of the ordinary, but the level of paranoia was new. I plugged the drive into my sandbox terminal, a standalone computer, completely disconnected from the network, and put on my headphones. The conversation was thick with jargon and code words, but one phrase snagged my attention. Project Nightingale. I'd been at the Bureau for almost a decade. I knew every project, every code name for every operation, active or defunct. I had organized the files, archived the reports, scheduled the debriefings, and I had never, ever heard of Project Nightingale. Professional pride is a funny thing. It's what drove me to be the best, to know everything. And not knowing what Project Nightingale was, it felt like a splinter in my mind. The next morning, after the transcript was fed to the shredder and the audio file was wiped, I did a quick, casual search on the main server. Nothing. I checked the deep archives, the ones only top-level admins are supposed to access. Still nothing. It was a ghost. And that's when my curiosity, a muscle I'd been training for 9 years, started to twitch. It wasn't suspicion, not yet. It was the simple, nagging need of a perfect secretary to balance her books, to make sure every file had a home. For the next few weeks, I lived in the margins. During my lunch break, instead of reading a novel, I'd explore the forgotten corners of the agency's digital attic. Over the years, system updates had left layers of old directories and forgotten data caches that nobody monitored. Only someone with my historical knowledge of the system would even know they were there. I started with deleted call logs. Sterling was careless. He used a secondary, supposedly secure comms app, but he didn't realize it briefly synced logs to a cloud server that was, for a short time 5 years ago, archived nightly. I found it. A single call to a number in a non-extradition country, made minutes after the Nightingale meeting. The call lasted 30 seconds, just long enough for a confirmation. Next, I turned to the financials. My job included prepping their expense reports. I knew their habits, but I started seeing things that didn't add up. Sterling was expensing dinners at restaurants he never went to. On nights he was supposedly home. The amounts were small, easy to miss. But when I cross-referenced the dates with encrypted email headers, I'd glimpsed on his screen. A pattern emerged. These dinners lined up perfectly with data transfers to an untraceable server. He wasn't eating. He was paying for secure uploads at data cafes. The tension was a constant, cold knot in my stomach. Every keystroke felt like a step in a minefield. Was I being watched? I used every trick I'd learned. Routing searches through old anonymizing protocols. Using retired admin accounts whose passwords were never changed. And burying my search queries in thousands of automated diagnostic requests. It was a high-wire act, performed in total silence. My heart would be pounding in my chest while I'd calmly tell a senator's aide that no, Director Vance wasn't available, all while a script I'd written was sifting through terabytes of archived data in the background. This wasn't about professional pride anymore. This was becoming something darker. I was finding fragments of agent rosters, mission parameters, and classified tech schematics, all packaged for export. It was a fire sale of national secrets. Stories like this, where the quietest person in the room is secretly the most dangerous, are a powerful reminder of the potential hiding in plain sight. If you're enjoying this trip into the shadows, do me a favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel and lets us know you want more stories about underestimated heroes. Now, let's get back to the moment Anya realized just how deep the rot went. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place on a Thursday. I was shredding a mountain of old documents from a decommissioned project. Agency procedure for classified materials is incredibly strict. But over the years, Vance and Sterling had gotten lazy, often just leaving boxes of low-priority classified files by my desk for me to handle. In one of those boxes, tucked inside a mislabeled folder, was a single printed PowerPoint slide. It was a budget proposal for Project Nightingale, and there it was, in black and white. The project was an internal mechanism for selling sensitive intelligence to a hostile nation. The budget detailed payments from the same shell corporations I recognized from Sterling's fake expense reports. It listed the type of intelligence being sold intel that would get field agents killed, compromise years of work, and destabilize entire regions. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just greed. This was high treason. The men I had served for nearly a decade were traitors. They were selling out their country, their colleagues, and the agents whose lives depended on them. In that moment, the weight of what I'd found nearly crushed me. I couldn't go to internal security. Vance had his own people in key positions. I had no idea who was in on it. I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. There was no one to report to, no one to trust. It was just me, the secretary. For 2 days, I was paralyzed by fear. I went through the motions of my job on autopilot, my mind racing. They could make me disappear. A quiet accident, a sudden illness. But then, the fear started to curdle into a cold, hard rage. They had underestimated me my entire career. They saw me as a tool. Now, I would use that perception as my weapon. They'd given me the keys to the kingdom, and I was going to burn it down around them. My plan took shape, not as one grand strategy, but as a series of small, meticulous steps executed with the very skills they'd always dismissed. First, the evidence. I couldn't just walk out with it. Taking classified documents off-site is a federal crime. So I got creative. I remembered an old, decommissioned pneumatic tube system from the 82nds, hidden behind the walls. The public slots were sealed, but the terminal in the sub-basement archives was still there. Over 3 nights, working late, under the guise of catching up, I used my admin access to get into the archives, opened the old terminal, and sent canister after canister of printed evidence to an abandoned storage room on the ground floor. For the digital files, I used a dead drop, uploading the encrypted data in tiny, untraceable packets from a public Wi-Fi network blocks away. Second, the players. I couldn't trust anyone inside. I needed an outsider. I spent hours researching journalists, looking for someone with a reputation for absolute integrity, someone who had taken on powerful people and won. I found her, a veteran reporter named Lena Petrova. Third, the timing. This had to be perfect. I decided to use their own schedules against them. I manufactured a crisis, a critical server failure in their private data center. It was a lie, a bit of code I planted myself, designed to ensure they would both be in the same secure, windowless room at a specific time, cut off from the outside world. Every action was cloaked in mundanity. I smiled, made coffee, rearranged appointments. The perfect, helpful secretary. All the while, I was building a cage around them, forged from the bars of their own arrogance. The day of the takedown was strangely calm. I wore my favorite blue dress, a little piece of personal armor. The final package of evidence had already been sent to Lena Petrova with an anonymous encrypted email. Publish at 3 p.m. EST. Not a minute sooner. At 2:30 p.m., my carefully orchestrated server failure alarm went off. Predictably, Vance and Sterling were furious, barking orders, their attention totally consumed by the fake crisis. As they headed for the server room, Vance paused. "Anya, get the tech lead on the phone. This is a disaster. I thought you confirmed the system diagnostics this morning." "I did, sir," I said, my voice perfectly even. There must be a scheduling conflict in the system. That's when Sterling delivered the line that sealed their fate. "You're a secretary, Anya, not an analyst. Stick to your calendar." He didn't even look at me. In that moment of pure, unadulterated condescension, I felt a wave of absolute certainty. It was over. They walked into the server room. I made a quiet call to building security about an unauthorized access attempt. In the sub-basement, a diversion to keep them busy. At exactly 3 p.m, my phone buzzed. Petrova's article was live. The headline was explosive: "High treason at the Bureau, top directors selling secrets." Seconds later, the agency's internal alarms began to blare. Not the fire alarm, the lockdown alarm. The signal that the DOJ and the FBI were in the building. From my desk, I watched as teams of federal agents stormed our floor. They moved with brutal efficiency. The doors to the server room were breached. I heard shocked, angry shouts, the sound of powerful men realizing their world had just ended. They were led out in handcuffs, their faces a mask of disbelief and fury. As they pushed Vance past my desk, his eyes found mine. The question was there, plain as day. "You?" I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just picked up my teacup, took a calm sip, and looked right through him, as if he were nothing more than a piece of office furniture. In the aftermath, the Bureau was gutted. A full investigation, kicked off by Petrova's reporting, uncovered a web of corruption that went deeper than I ever imagined. Vance and Sterling were tried and convicted, destined to spend the rest of their lives in a federal prison. As for me, I quietly handed in my resignation the next week. I didn't want a medal. That was never the point. My actions weren't for glory. They came from a quiet, stubborn belief in doing the right thing. It was about protecting the people in the field, the ones who put their lives on the line, trusting that the people in charge had their backs. My story will never be officially told. In the final report, the discovery was attributed to an anonymous internal tip. I faded back into the background, just where I'd always been. But I left knowing that true power isn't about the title on your door or the volume of your voice. Sometimes it's held by the person no one bothers to look at. So the next time you walk past a secretary's desk, remember, they see everything. They know everything. Never, ever underestimate them. The world is full of underestimated heroes. Who is the most memorable underdog you've ever read about or seen on screen? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want more stories that prove the quiet ones are the most powerful, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next video. Thanks for watching.